So we are continuing in our Vision series, and the Russian service got a condensed version of the sermon. You guys are going to get the long, extended Lord of the Rings version of the sermon. Not too long, I promise. It's super important, and the topic today is authentic fellowship. How do we have authentic fellowship? And in the end, the goal is to fulfill the mission that is given to us in the Great Commission, and the one that we phrased for our church as glorifying God by proclaiming Christ and building up believers. And authentic Christ-centered fellowship is integral to that. To build up a believer, you need to be present with other believers, and that is the way that we do this. I wanted to start with this idea. I wanted to start from the place of why is there even a need to say that authentic fellowship, a community group, a gathering that is outside of the Sunday service, why is it important? And the reason for that is because it's not something like breathing that we do automatically. It is not something that we are consciously aware of, mostly because of the rise of individualism in our world. And for those of us who are in the United States, individualism is kind of the foundation of the United States, of do what you want, do not be dependent on anybody else. And this seed of radical individualism has borne its fruit. In the past, you really couldn't survive, for the most part, without family, without community. You had the individuals who knew and could do everything, and they could survive in the wilderness. But for the rest of the people, they existed in a community, and up until the modern day, you really didn't have an opportunity. You had multifamily homes. You had individuals living with their parents for a long time, not because they couldn't leave, but because they didn't want to leave, because it was important for survival, for building the family business or whatever it might be. Yet today, you can go out, you can leave everybody behind, you can move to a new city where you know absolutely no one, and you can thrive and you can succeed and you can become whatever you want. And for those who are coming from the Soviet Union, you think, oh, well, they're coming from a place where the government dictated community. You were not an individual, you were part of the collective. You were part of the Soviet people. But because it was shoved down people's throats, they ended up rebelling against it. In the 1990s, everybody wanted to go their own way. They got tired of this ideologically pure community that was being pushed on them. And therefore, to this day, we still have this rebellion against being in a group of people that are interdependent on each other, who need each other to grow, to fulfill the function of the Great Commission. And if we look to Jesus, it becomes clear that even upon his short ministry here on earth, community was important to him. He went out into the desert, he was tempted, and at the start of his mission, the first thing he does is he goes out and he finds disciples. He goes out and he finds 12 who were going to be the closest of the close ones. There were hundreds and maybe even thousands that followed him as disciples, but they were not the ones with who he had authentic fellowship in the way that we understand it and read about it in the Gospels. And all of that to say that Jesus understood his mission was not just to tell somebody about God. Because he could have very well traveled from the bottom to the top of Israel at that time, proclaimed to everybody the good news of the gospel, and left. But no, he chose to exist for 2 to 3 years with a group of individuals who grew up in community with him. And in Mark 3:16, we read about the group that he formed, and he appointed to the 12, Mark 3:16, and he appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder, and Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. And it's interesting to see Jesus, if we actually read through how he called them, he started with the people you'd expect. He started with the good Torah-observing boys of Peter and John by the lake with their dad. They're doing everything right. They're the good boys. Yes, definitely going to form a community with them. They are the ones that I want to interact with on a daily basis. But he doesn't stop there. He doesn't create a homogeneous mass of like-minded individuals, because he goes off and he gets himself another disciple in Matthew. He gets himself the person who is on Rome's payroll. He is going to the oppressors and taking one of his own who are oppressing his own people, and he's saying, come with me. You're going to be perfect. And we think, okay, so Jesus is going to go for the more liberal, the more progressive maybe, like Romans aren't so bad, folks. Like that's the leaning that he's going to have. And then he goes to the complete opposite end of the political spectrum, and he gets Simon the Zealot. So we've got the guy who is working for Rome, and we've got the guy who wants to kill Rome, and we've got the guys in the middle, and he's forming this group of zealots and good Torah boys and people who lived a life that was called and seen as lawless. And this amalgam of disciples, it wasn't done by accident. It was done to create a group where there would be tension. Because can you imagine the discussions that the zealot would have with the tax collector? Like, how could you betray Rome? It's like, well, you see, it was a complicated thing, and this is what ended up happening. It's like, but how can you kill a Roman? And there's all this politics and taxes and money, and how do you live, and what do you do? And these discussions, they didn't end. It'd be like taking a person from a Dilona, from a non-registered Baptist fundamentalist church, and sticking him in the same community group as somebody who has black hair, black fingernails, dresses in all black, and might or might not be goth. We're not going to ask that question. Like that radical and significantly more, because I know that the conservative fundamentalist Baptist person isn't going to try to kill the goth person and other way around. The zealot might have. The zealot might have. If he was given the chance, you don't know. Jesus, you weren't watching. You told us not to kill each other, so I'm going to obey that command. But so radical, so different. The sons of thunder, you have Thomas the skeptic and the introvert. And you have Peter the extrovert who always harasses us introverts. And then you had Judas, also a zealot, but a different type of zealot, cold and calculating. And depending on your view, this might be either the perfect community group, or it must be the community group that is destined to fail. The fellowship, the group of people with who to live life that will inevitably fail, and yet it doesn't. It is the training ground of a messy reality, because in reality, you are going to encounter people who hold different opinions, who hold different worldviews, who have different goals from you. But the question is, what is the training for? The training is for real growth in discipleship to Jesus. That is the end goal. Our goal as a church in the very end is to be like Jesus. And to be like Jesus means that we proclaim the gospel. And to be like Jesus means that we bring in unbelievers. And to be like Jesus means that we help out those around us in fellowship and kindness and in compassion. So the first thing that we can draw out of this example is that community is non-optional for discipleship to Jesus. It's not an option. You can't choose not to be a part of a small group. And again, church is great. Church is fantastic. It serves a very good and important role to make sure that we are connected, that we can see we're not the only ones out there with faith. But you don't get deep, transformative conversations in a group of 100 people. It just can't happen based on time. And we can't follow Jesus alone. We read about Jesus, it's always with groups of 12 of his disciples, with 6, with 3, with 2 others. But it's never just him. It's never just him and somebody else. It's never just him by himself. He's always with his disciples. He goes out into the wilderness to be with his Father, and he comes back in fellowship with his community. The Barna Institute, it's a Christian think tank. They asked about the preferred method of discipleship of Christians. And their response was that 40% of people, almost half, said they wanted to do it alone. They wanted to follow Jesus all by themselves, not on a group, not one by one, because I think that, when they thought about it, they're like, who could I really tolerate in this world? Me and Jesus. Those are the two people. I'm friends with them. They're great. We have a great relationship. And we too, as children of God, we think, wow, I'm going to be a disciple. I'm going to be a child of God in my life. And I have to ask you, does it work that way in the real world? If I think about my son and my relationship to him, he is indeed my son. But that is not his only identity. He is not just a child of Anatoliy. He is also the brother of Amy and Ellie. He is also the son of Anna. He is also the grandson of Valentina. He doesn't exist in a vacuum where he and he alone, his only identity is, I am a child of Anatoliy. No. Yet we feel it's okay, or our conscience isn't stirred when we say the same thing about our following of Jesus. I am a child of God. It's like, well, are you in relationship with other children of God? No. I don't have a good relationship with my siblings. I don't want a relationship with my siblings, or I don't have any siblings. I just exist to worship God alone, and that is not right. To be a disciple is to make sure that you have a personal relationship with Jesus, but also personal relationship with his children. You can't be a disciple when you're just one in a crowd of 100. When you just feel like people pass you by or they don't notice you. And there's a reason that loneliness, that it comes back to us. Community and authentic fellowship, they can't be done in a large church service. You can do a lot of things in a large church service. You can come and you can communally worship God. You can get teaching that you go out and you live out in everyday life. But to be naked and unafraid in front of your fellow church members, to spill everything and every darkest secret and every worry of your heart, it's both impractical and it can't happen in a large environment. It happens in a group of a few people. It's hard to talk about important things with just 20 minutes after church. Some of you stay longer, an hour. But how much fellowship do you have in that moment? It is the hard work of the religious, the passionate, the angry, the outsider, and every category in between of believers learning to live and serve together. That is what authentic fellowship is like. And community is good, and we were created for it. We were created to be in the presence of other individuals, not to live life alone, not to move to a separate city, to live our own life where we go to work and we come home. And we just exist in that mindset of my focus can't be broken. We realize that when we try to live. Because it doesn't work. We need that community. We were created for community because community is good. When something really good happens, when you have a birthday party, you invite friends. It is not a party if you sit there alone and you blow out a candle on a cupcake. It is not a party. But when we want to rejoice, when we graduate, we go out and we try to celebrate. We either find people that we know, or if you have nobody, people still pursue it. They go to a place where maybe somebody can rejoice with me. We are built for community. And when something bad happens, we always seek to be together. When my dad passed away, we didn't need financial help. We didn't need somebody to cook for us. We had those things taken care of. But what we did need is for family from 5 states to come together and to converge on Sacramento, to be there with us in those moments of pain and mourn with us. Whether in sadness or in joy, we are a people made for community. It is not optional to follow, to be separated. And the thing is that having friends is not the same thing as community. Being able to hang out is not the same thing as the community that is described in Scripture. It's not bad, but it is not the same thing. It is not online friends. By definition, community is defined as people you live in close proximity to and that you carry some kind of joint mission with. And in this case, we reside in the city of Sacramento, and the joint mission is to bring the gospel to the world. That joins us together. That is what a community is composed of, and that is why it is so important. And by definition, community sees you as your real self. Not as something where you can present a curated image of yourself, but you, the real you, who sees you on good days and bad days, with or without makeup, with your hair done, without your hair done, waking up 5 minutes before coming in and seeing you just as you are, and being okay with that. That is community. We were designed for it, and it is a good thing. And then in Hebrews, we get this idea. We get what community is doing in our lives. Hebrews 10, we're going to read selectively something similar to what we read in the Bible reading this morning. Hebrews 10:1. For the law, since it has only a shadow of the good things to come and not the form of those things itself, can never by the same sacrifice which they offer continually every year, make those who approach it perfect. We start in a place of law. We start in a place where we're aiming for some goal. We don't know what it is. And it continues in verse 10. By this will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all. So something has been given to us. Something has been entrusted to us to do, to make the will of God, to make that thing that the law couldn't do actually a reality. Verse 16 continues, this is the covenant which I will make with them after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my laws upon their hearts, and write them on their mind. That was the goal. That was where we are headed. The goal of Christ's sacrifice was to write something on us that we didn't have there before, something that we're to pursue, something that will change us. And verse 23 continues what that thing actually is and how it actually is implemented. Verse 23, let's hold firmly to the confession of our hope without wavering, Christ's sacrifice for us. For he who promised is faithful. And let's consider how to encourage one another in love and good deeds, not abandoning our meeting together as is the habit of some people, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. This is how the change is happening. We're encouraging, we're guiding, we're reminding of something. For verse 26, for if we go on sinning willfully after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a terrifying expectation of judgment and the fury of a fire which will consume the adversaries. That's the goal. Community was put in place by God to encourage and to guide us back to something that was written on our hearts through Christ's redemption. And if we choose not to participate, if we choose to go it alone, there is no more sacrifice left. We will sin and we will continue to sin. And community is the way that we do it. But it requires commitment. It requires that something else is pushed out, and community and that fellowship and that desire to be together takes its place. Hebrews reminds us that community is the byproduct of commitment, and that we are reminded that the hope of our Savior comes through the work of community. So that we're not focusing on ourselves, so we're not thinking, oh, am I a good person? Am I doing the right thing? Am I following after Jesus? No. We've got a group, a trusted group that meets with you and that you meet with them. And together you can speak into each other's lives and say, we have been given salvation that we didn't deserve, that the law couldn't give us, yet it is here now and we are to obey it. And we exist in this paradox, right? Because we all strive to be close to somebody like that. We want that. We message people, we text them because we want their attention. Maybe we don't even have anything to say, we just want to talk. We reach out and we try to make friends online, and we say, hey, here's the stuff that I'm doing, here's the stuff that you're doing. You like my photos, I like yours. It's not explicit like that, but the idea is there. We pursue that community. We want something from it. In our world, this desire to be committed, but at the same time pull away, it's just present everywhere. You don't even have to buy things with commitment. Costco says, if it's an item that isn't technology, bring it back at any time. I've seen the couches that people bring back to Costco. It's terrible. I can't even commit to a couch. Like, what are you guys doing? Like, why? Well, because I want to keep my options open. What if something better comes along? What if the couch that comes out next week at Costco is better than the couch that I got last week at Costco? It's like, buddy, you bought this like 3 years ago at least. The stains on it are witness to that. It is not about that. It is our desire to both pull close, but at the same time, push away. And being at Bryte Church can sometimes be summarized as come to the Sunday service. And that's good and that's important. I don't want to denigrate. I don't want to lower that in any way. But to be in authentic fellowship, to be in fellowship, not that the church is not authentic fellowship, but to be in a fellowship where you are known, where you can be known and you know others, that can't be done in a large group. If we want to grow, we need to have authentic Christ-centered fellowship. And there's two ways that we can live on earth, as sojourners or as aliens. And we're actually called to do both things, depending on where our destination is. So we are called to be both sojourners and aliens. But oftentimes what ends up happening is we end up flipping those two things. We say, I'm going to actually be a sojourner at church. I'm going to be a sojourner in community, but I will be a resident here on earth. And you say, well, that's ridiculous. We don't really say that. It's like, we don't, but we act it out. We exist in a church. We don't want to get too attached. We don't want to get involved in ministry. We don't want to get too tied up because then there's going to be responsibilities. Then we can't really move. We can't go to another church next week because all of a sudden we've got like 5 ministries that we're carrying. And those people are our friends and they rely on us. So we can't get too tied down. So we don't want to participate. Yet on earth, we strive to become rooted. We strive to become residents and citizens. We want to exist. We build homes, our pursuits. All of your pursuits, I'm assuming, for the most part, are going to be, I want to get a home. I want to get a good job. I want to leave behind an inheritance. I want my children's children, my grandchildren, to have something left of them. And it's like, you're not ready to move. You're not ready to go anywhere when you've sunk your roots so deep. And that commitment, it is important to our lives. If we are to commit to a community, then as a result of it, we will get its benefits. We will get that authentic fellowship. We will get that growth. Benedict of Nursia, also called Saint Benedict, he lived around 500 AD, and he followed a rule of life. We had talked about this, that became the basis for the formation of religious communities all over Europe. And he set it up for himself, and it was a big book, and he just essentially explained like why I do the things that I do. But to those who wanted to join these communities, these abbeys, they had to take 3 vows. One was of stewardship, that you'll take care of the stuff that we have. Don't ruin the buildings, take care of the plates. Of obedience, you'll follow the rules. But the last one was interesting. It was a vow of stability. It was a vow that you will have a lifelong commitment to the community. Whether good or bad, whether it grows or whether it falters, you will have commitment to it. And stability was defined by him, if you want to paraphrase it, as staying put to get somewhere. Stability is about staying put to get somewhere. There is some benefit to moving around. You need to do things, but if you're trying to move a tree every single year from spot to spot, it's not going to survive. It's not going to live. So stability was defined as staying put to get somewhere. The fact that we can get somewhere better by moving, by shifting, by getting away from those things, it's usually an illusion. Because people are everywhere and people are all the same. And even if you get out into the wilderness and it's just you and God alone, you're still stuck with people and they still are exactly the same. They still have the same faults. They still have the commitments. And whether it's here at Bryte, again, it's, if you find a spot, if you find a place where God is working in you, whether it's here at Bryte or somewhere else, go and stay. Find that stability, find that growth, sink your roots deep wherever you make your home. The second thing is that community unveils the real us. It unveils the real us. In Hebrews, when he was talking about not abandoning our meetings together as is the habit of some people, for if we go on sinning willfully, community unveils the real us, in that it shows us that we want to sin willfully. Our desire, we restrain it, but the natural desire of a sinful human body, of a human being, redeemed or not, is to sin willfully. The only difference is whether we restrain that as a believer or whether we have it, let it have free reign. But our desire, the heart, still has and wants those things. It still wants to avoid a Christ-centered fellowship because it points fingers to our sin. Like we want to avoid community because it will point to our sin, which we are afraid of confronting. Our natural desire is to sin willfully, and others make it difficult to do so if they too desire to not sin willfully, if they desire not to pursue that path. And the presence of and interaction with people is what forces us to deal with our real self. And we recognize that, right? In marriage, you have to deal with your real self. You thought you were a good person who didn't snore at night. You have to deal with your real self because that's not true. When you have kids, you thought you were a patient person. All of a sudden, you have to deal with the real self. Unnoticed anger issues that you didn't realize you even had. Whenever we get close, we always recognize that we are not the way that we imagined. I don't yell at myself for breaking dishes. I don't yell at myself for holding the flashlight wrong when I'm trying to do something under the car. Yet that is something that we don't notice and others do. By definition, we can't get into a fight with ourselves about what restaurant to eat at. It just doesn't happen. But the real you can get into that fight. Explicitly in the presence of others, all those things are true. A spouse breaks a dish, okay, we don't yell at them, but we say, you shouldn't have been doing that. The kid's not holding the flashlight right. The kid's not doing the homework fast enough. He's not eating fast enough. He didn't eat everything. And all of a sudden, the real you comes out. In community, in fellowship, in those deep relationships, that is how we learn about who we are. When we're alone, we realize who we are, but we don't actually deal with it. Or at least we tend not to. We want to overlook it. Even when we're in a group, we want to just hang out. Just want to exist. And again, that's a good thing to do, but you are not naked and unashamed emotionally, spiritually with those people. When you're just hanging out and you're talking about a myriad of other things, you're not exposing who you are in the core of who you actually are. And the imperfect and sometimes grossly imperfect nature of who we are becomes obvious when we choose to live life that way. And it's a scary proposition. It is scary because it's like I don't want to learn something about myself that I'm going to have to fix. And it doesn't seem like we say that explicitly, but we live it out. When we exist at home, when we have a fight with our spouse, when something happens with the kids, the first response is, okay, this happened, I'm sorry, I apologize, but you do not tell anybody about this. With our spouse, we understand, look, we get into a fight, I can't tell my friends and she can't tell her friends. Why? Not because it wasn't the right thing or the wrong thing to do, it's because if I hold up my end of the bargain, this stays within the family. It doesn't have to get out. People don't have to change the way that they look at us. And that's what we want. And then there's nowhere to hide when we decide that we want to be in community, because it will come out. You think to yourself, it's like, look, these people that I interact with on a daily basis, they barely like me. I barely like them. Like, can you imagine if all my friends, the two of them that I only have, like if they actually saw the real me? Well, they want nothing to do with me. They wouldn't want me as I am. I'd have to change. I'd have to fix things. And maybe I wouldn't do it fast enough and they'd leave for better friends. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to participate in that. And unfortunately, the people who are closest to us, they bear the brunt of the reality of who we are. Like, I like you guys, so I'm not going to really interact with you as much as I could. I'm not going to show you the real me because the real me isn't very good. Because I guarantee you, if you came to my house, you would see the most wonderful and the most beautiful things that I do for my kids and for my wife. Things that I would never do for any of you. But at the same time, you'd see things that are far worse than I'd ever do to any one of you. They both get the good and the best of me and the worst of me. And in reality, they just get the real me. They get who I am at my core, changed or unchanged, working or unworking on myself. And I realize this and you realize this as well, and that's why we fear it. We are the best with who we are closest to, but we're also the worst. But community is where we are transformed. Small groups, small interactions, they don't even have to be called small groups. But community is where we are transformed, how we grow. Hold firm to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he has promised to be faithful. God has promised that if you pursue that type of relationship with other believers, he will be faithful. He will write the law in your heart. He will transform you. He will change. Your friends won't leave, or if they leave, you'll find new ones that are just like you, who understand who they are at their core. And you will not be alone. And yet what we do when we're transformed is we draw back to that plumb line of what is love. What is reality? What are we like? Is God holy? Are we holy? Are we pursuing holiness? We are drawn back to that plumb line that Jesus set for us. We don't measure against ourselves. We measure about something that is accurate. And the way that community transforms us is through two pairs of two methods. Through exposure and accountability, and through vulnerability and encouragement. It exposes us through exposure and accountability. Through exposure and encouragement, it exposes what's inside of us. Community reveals what is in your thoughts. It revealed for the disciples what was in their thoughts. And for everyone except for Judas, it revealed the right thing. You want, and in the end, pursue God. You might do it wrong. You might want to call down fire on a city, but in the end, you pursue God. It revealed to them, it exposed their pure motivations, less than noble thoughts. I mean, the brothers came up to Jesus. They had their mom do it. They're like, Mom, can you please talk to Jesus so we can be at your right and at your left hand? It reveals your motivations. It reveals who you actually are, what you pursue and what you want. The part of you that's broken by sin, the part that you try to hide and do hide effectively from the public. And it's you, it's the real you. And the harm that it does gets revealed, and it can be dealt with, and it can be fixed. We are blind to it until it's revealed in community. But community also encourages us. It exposes us, but it encourages us. It says that the only way that you can heal these relationship wounds, the only way that you can heal relationship wounds is through relationship. You're encouraged, you're given help, you understand that you're not the only one, that you can find healing. But it also allows us to voluntarily. So exposure and accountability are involuntary practices. You yelled when you weren't supposed to, you made eyes at your kids that showed what was actually in your heart, even though you're saying, go clean up your toys. And they understand there is fire behind those eyes. They know, and you let that get out, and now everybody knows. Everybody knows what fire looks like in your eyes. So there's the exposure part that's involuntary, but there is also the vulnerability part. In community, we can be vulnerable and yet still held accountable. And it's dangerous because vulnerability exposes things about you that other people can use to hurt you. They can expose sins, they can expose fears, they can expose actions, and all of that can be filed together in a dossier and used as blackmail at some point in the future. And we risk it. We risk it nevertheless. We pursue it nevertheless. You might be rejected, you might be criticized, but you pursue it nevertheless. And at the same time, let's say there isn't anything that is so wrong, but there's actually good things. You're like, I'm gonna start working out, or I'm gonna donate part of my check to this mission, or I'm going to donate part of my life. I'm going to devote my life to a certain ministry. And then you're held accountable to it, and you're like, I don't want that accountability. And so we don't expose those things. There's vulnerability, there's risk in all those things, but there's also accountability, where we can be held accountable, where people can say, look, we're pursuing this together. You want holiness. You want to be a disciple after Christ. You're not doing it in this way. You need to fix this. You need to pursue this. Scripture encourages us because the community of faith is exactly those who are holding us accountable, who should be holding us accountable. In the Psalms, it says, may the righteous strike me with mercy and discipline me. It is oil for my head shall not refuse it. Who else to tell you that you're wrong? Who else to tell you that you're not doing the right thing than those who love you? Those who love Jesus and want you to love him the same. But we need both those dynamics, because if we do one or the other, it actually falls into a balance that isn't good. If we have exposure without encouragement, what we end up falling into is just cruel legalism. Like, oh, we're going to figure out what this guy's doing wrong, and we're going to blackmail him for it. It's legalism. It is cruel. But encouragement without exposure, all that does is that just leads to hidden sins. Oh, you're doing great. Follow Jesus. Yes, sin. No, don't. We'll worry about that later. It's the same thing with vulnerability and accountability. If we're vulnerable without accountability, well, then nothing changes. Oh, I did this sin. It's like, okay, cool. It's like, well, do I need to change anything? No, you're fine. But accountability without vulnerability, if we are always held accountable, but we don't ever become vulnerable with the people, we never actually dig to the root of our problem. Why do you pursue? Why are those things still present in your life? Community is the place where we can do both. Unwilling exposure or trusting vulnerability both lead us to grow nearer. And they're outcomes. They're just natural outcomes of the way that that's structured. And it'll always bring us closer. And the last thing is that community takes time and intention. It requires you to intentionally pursue it and let let's consider how to encourage one another with love and good deeds. It isn't something that happens naturally. Let's think about, let's contemplate, let's brainstorm. How can we encourage one another? How can we lead ourselves closer? It takes time to build trust. It takes time to get to the place where you can get to the deepest secret, where you can get to the deepest problem, get to the deepest sin. We have to intentionally become interdependent on each other. And that's why community, it isn't built around a stage. It's built around a table at home where you share a meal, where you share your sins, where you pray, where you confess, where you're held accountable. Community exists not in church pews, but on couches, where you can spend an hour or two, and you can work through all those things, all the problems, all the issues. Because at the table and the couch, you can come together and confess sins and shortcomings. This is where I messed up. This is where I fell short. We don't get just broken down. We get built up. And that's why it can be so lonely in church and in these large gatherings, in impersonal get-togethers. It's like, yeah, I felt like I was there, but I wasn't. It can happen in small groups. It can happen in large groups. But that loneliness comes from the lack of connection, the lack of exposing yourself in a spirit and an emotion to somebody else so they can see who you are at your core. And there's nothing wrong with sharing the goodnesses because we always end up sharing the good, right? We always look our best for the party. We always look our best for church. But it's always the good parts of us. It's never the bad. It's never the troublesome. If you're having a bad day, you don't come to church in, rags and people are like, oh, he's having a bad day. You come in good clothes still. You present a good face. And you don't have to do that with people who you're close to. Our greatest intimacy comes from the moment of greatest exposure and vulnerability. The deeper you go, the deeper you dig into your heart, the more a person knows about you, the closer that intimacy is, the closer that fellowship is. And that's why in the letter to the Hebrews, the instructions are so clear. Encourage one another in love and good deeds. I know you don't want to. The early church, you guys are like 100 years away from Jesus walking the earth, less than 100 years. And already you're like, I just want to do this thing alone. Just me and Jesus, me and a relationship with God. And he's calling them back. He's saying, come back. You can't do it alone. Come together in community. There's a book that's actually being made into a movie called The Boys in the Boat. It's about 9 American college students from the University of Washington and their pursuit of Olympic rowing. And they trained for 2 to 3 years and together, and they actually went on to win gold at the Berlin Olympics in 1936. But the thing is, they trained for 2 or 3 years, and they gave this interesting statistical fact about them, that in those 2 years, they rowed together for 4,300 miles, back and forth and back and forth. To put that in perspective, if they were wanting to attend the Olympic Games and they got on their rowboat in New York, it would be only 3,900 miles to Berlin. They'd need to do 400 miles of laps in the port of Hamburg to just reach that amount. And they actually went there. And in the Olympics, though, they had heats. And during those heats, the total duration of their racing was only 28 miles. They trained for 28 miles of racing. 0.6% of their entire effort was the only thing that mattered. If love is the measure of our Christian maturity, then community is its training ground. In the 4,300 miles of rowing that they did everything wrong. They broke oars, they capsized the boat, they missed the starting pistol, they missed the instructions, they beached the boat. They did everything that you could do wrong. They argued who was right, they argued who was wrong, they got hurt feelings, they got happy feelings, and they did all of that in community. And despite all of that, where it mattered for the 28 miles, they actually did what they were supposed to, and they won gold. They were undefeated. Every single heat, they won. They were undefeated. They practiced and practiced, and the number of hours that they spent in that boat is a similar number of hours. It's similar to the hours that we spend in community, where we fail, where we mess up, where we get angry, where we blame people, where you say it's your fault, and you say, no, it's your fault. and we work it out, and we understand that the messy reality of who we are, we've got zealots, we've got introverts, we've got extroverts, we've got the passionate, we've got the completely those who are just not wanting to do anything. And yet we come together in this group, we come together and we grow in love. Those closest relationships are the training ground of love. And if you're wondering if this is a complicated process, it's not. If you're not in a group, it's as simple as coming together and grabbing 4 random people. They don't have to have your interests. They don't have to have your age. Find 2 people, find 4 people, find 6. Get together. No program, no schedule, no defined end goal. The end goal is just to be in fellowship with one another. Come together. Discuss what you read during the reading plan this week. Figure out, what did God open to you? What stood out to you? Nothing stood out. Well, why do you think, why mention all of this genealogy? Talk about it. Wrestle with the text. Find out what it means. Or just get together and eat. Get together for dinner and just eat and pray around a table. If there's 6 of you there and you pray for 10 minutes, pray for the things that are wrong, pray for the things that are right, for hopes and dreams. It's an hour of prayer that will bring you closer together. For those of you who don't gather outside of the church, you have to understand this is not an optional part of your relationship and walk with God. It's not enough to come to church on Sunday to be a face in the hundreds. Don't abandon your meetings as some of you have the habit to do so. For those of you who are in group, continue. Because in the end, there's going to be 28 miles. And that's all that's going to matter. Your witness to the world, that's all that's going to matter. Whether you fought in community group, whether you disagreed, cried or laughed, whatever it might be, what matters is that final result. What kind of witness will you be to the world? And no matter where you're starting, whether you're starting on mile 0 or you're almost to Berlin, stand and be in fellowship, be in community, be a people after the heart of God. Amen. Let's stand, and I'll give you a minute to respond in your seats, and then I will conclude in prayer. Heavenly Father, we come before you, Lord, with both joy and angst in our hearts when we realize that your intention for us was to always be in the presence of other believers, to know them and to be known to them. That through that fellowship, through that accountability, through the vulnerability, through the exposure, through the accountability and through the encouragement, that we would become a people of God. Those who want to disciple under you and those who want to become like you, to be like you, to live like you, to witness like you. And you've given us the perfect training ground. You've given us the perfect place where we can practice the skills that we need to be a light to the nation, that we might be a true light. That we would be able to say to others, this is a place where you are known, where you're accepted, where you're challenged, where you're taught and encouraged to stay away from the things that cause you pain and trouble in your life and follow after Jesus. He is the most important thing in our life, and I'm so grateful that he taught by example, and now we are to follow it. May we do so faithfully, truthfully, and to our joy. Amen.